And welcome back to the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. Jason Bryant here with you today. On the show, Shannon Scovel from NCAA.com. She has been the wrestling beat reporter for NCAA.com for a number of years. Also, you've got some teaching responsibilities to do. Before we get into your wrestling and your background, what do you do right now? What are you doing at this exact moment in the wonderful state of Tennessee?
Yeah, so I just started my new position as an assistant professor of sports communication at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I'm currently teaching this semester. I'm teaching our sports reporting across the media course and our intro to journalism and mass communication course.
So that kind of gets into a question about journalism. I'm going to jump into this right now because, if you will look at your profile, you spent some time working at SI in your developmental years with journalism, and I've got SIs behind me, framed. I mean, you talk about the cover. I mean, this is like what's happening to Sports Illustrated is just kind of sad.
It's so heartbreaking. I remember when I interned there, it was the summer of 2016. So I felt like I was living the dream. I was in Manhattan. I was biking over the Brooklyn Bridge to work, covering the Olympics. It was everything I thought I wanted to do in sports journalism, working for this prestigious magazine. And what's happened to the company over the last 6 years has just been devastating. 8 years. And I'm hopeful that there's so much great journalism out there and so many great journalists out there covering sports that we can continue to maintain that quality, whether it's under a different name or perhaps in a new reimagined version of the brand. But yeah, it really is. Sports Illustrated holds such a special place in my heart because of that internship and what it means to the industry. So I'm optimistic, but it's sad as well.
Yeah, and growing up, I was the kid who got Sports Illustrated starting in second grade. I remember just one reason. Living in Minnesota, we get a lot of snow. We don't have any snow on the ground right now, but I remember we got this big snow where I grew up in Virginia, and Chris Jackson was on the cover of SI, and he went on to become Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, played for the Denver Nuggets for a long time. He played for LSU. I just remember getting that second one because that's the one where Football Follies came in the mail with it. So it's like you get the VHS of the tape, and I just my friends were getting Sports Illustrated for kids. No, I wanted SI. I had everyone from I think Tony Rice might have been on the first cover when Notre Dame played West Virginia in the Fiesta Bowl that year. So these iconic covers. I have a cover of Leroy Selman on the cover for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Pernell Whitaker when he got robbed against Julio Cesar Chavez. So, as a sports fan, those covers are iconic. Justin Verlander throws the no-hitter like he's an ODU guy, so I have that one. There's things that you want covers. And, with the way journalism has moved, it's kind of hard being a journalist these days. I mean, obviously, when you cover the news part of it, you're getting, hit from left, right, center, far left, far right. But when we cover sports, we seem to be kind of immune to that, that political sphere. We cover this because this is what it is. We're not influenced by, where we may sit on the political spectrum. And, the lines of that are getting blurred a bit. So in you coming in through this part of your career, how do you do that? How do you teach that these days?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. We just had a lecture on local news yesterday, and I brought out my first ever print byline, which was published in the Raleigh News and Observer in 2013. And I really feel like my short career, I've gone from covering sports in print newspapers in that quick deadline, traditional filing process. Paper comes out in the morning and your byline's in it too. Now I do a little bit I've done some social for NCAA wrestling. So I tell my students my career has gone from newspapers to TikTok in about 10 years. And it's crazy what I tell them and what I tell myself to maintain positivity around journalism is that I'm using the same techniques of storytelling and I'm still trying to cover things accurately and in an enthusiastic, exciting way to reach fans and to give these athletes their moment, which is our big mission at NCAA. So I like to think that those core journalism principles are still coming through in the work that I do now. And I hope that students feel like they can still be journalists in the truest sense of the word, regardless of the medium that they're working on.
So a little bit of I've told people grew up listening to sports radio. I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I worked at a newspaper for 8 years. How did you want to be into this field? I mean, how do you want to be a sports broadcaster, sports journalist?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my sports journalism career began my senior year of high school. I was at my swimming state championship meet and I was being interviewed by the local reporter, not because I was good, but our team had had a really good run. And so we were chatting and he had seen that I had committed to American University to study journalism. And at the time, my only journalism experience was with my high school newspaper and, just very typical high school newspaper experience. But this reporter, J. Mike Blake, said, hey, I see you're interested in journalism. Would you like to do sports? Do you want to cover some high school sports in your last semester of high school for the paper before you go on to college? And it was an amazing opportunity. He didn't have to reach out to me like that, but he gave me a chance. and I caught the bug pretty quickly. And then I went to American, which if you're familiar with American, but for those of people who aren't, it's a very politically active campus. So my first semester, I should say my first year, I thought, oh, I'll do political journalism. I don't really have the personality for political journalism. And so then I took a sports reporting course, and that's when I really fell in love with it and realized I can build a career out of this.
Well, and that's another question we have is like building a career in sports journalism is kind of tough. We're seeing, layoffs here and there with, the SI, I guess controversy about using AI in SI. And then we've got the Athletic, which is, promotes itself as a great journalism venture. I subscribe to it. I get a lot of good stuff from the teams I follow. There's a lot of great stories there. It's like, that's like if I want to read something that's like well researched or something, then I subscribe to Matt Brown's Extra Points newsletter, which is another range of how people are creating journalism and things of that nature now. But when it comes into wrestling, let's talk about how you take what you're interested in your background and find this sport of wrestling. You came from another, I hate to use the term non-revenue sport. I like to use niche sport or Olympic sport, or sport other administrators don't seem to like as much. But you came from the swimming world, which has some of the same battles wrestling has in terms of coverage. But, how does this world from a swimmer go to the world of wrestling?
Yeah, I'm with you. I like Olympic sport because I think non-revenue can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It doesn't have to be. But as a swimmer and someone in a sport that's often undercovered in the media, I felt this calling to amplify other athletes who had great stories and were doing great things. Particularly at American, our Olympic sports are really known for academics because we're in a really tough conference, and we feel like as a school, we can separate ourselves in the Patriot League or the EIWA through academic performance. So I saw the incredible things that my peers were doing on and off the mat and in and out of the pool. And as the sports editor and editor-in-chief of my college newspaper, I had an opportunity to cover them. And so I reached out to Teague Moore, who was the coach at the time, and we just started chatting. And I think there was a connection there between these tough, gritty sports. They respected me, I respected them, and I knew they had a lot to say, and they were really open to talking to me. And I got great access to the athletes because they don't get a lot of coverage. And it was so much more fun to cover a sport where you can really get to know the individuals on a one-on-one basis than a sport where all you get is the press conference right after the game. And I had a good experience covering all sports at American, but wrestling was a sport where I really felt like I could let my journalism creativity come out and do longer stories and more in-depth reporting.
Did you find it that with wrestling, when you say you have to do more in-depth, you have to explain backstory more because people picking up the paper, they're not going to know that, AU played at Bender Arena in basketball, or they're not going to wrestling was at Bender Arena. Well, they might know basketball was there because they might get the clip, whether they go through the website or they're on social or something. Whereas, the Olympic sports tend to not get the 30 seconds on TV or the radio clip or the Sports Center 20 on 20, update.
Yeah, I haven't gone back and read my old clips because that's a horrible experience. But
Oh,
I
God.
would
Yeah.
that my early stories were much simpler because I was learning the sport. And so I was writing it from the perspective of somebody who was relatively new to wrestling, figuring things out and trying to explain that to my readers. But what I loved most about those early years of covering it at AU was the great quotes. The wrestlers give the best quotes. And that really drove my story. And I really leaned on the athletes and Teague and his coaching staff to help me learn the sport as both a journalist and a fan.
But you've also got, you came in, you had a little bit of wrestling knowledge prior to
I did.
covering wrestling, though.
Yes, a little bit. I didn't. So I started covering wrestling in my sophomore year, so it'd be 2014, 2015. But I have a wrestling family. My dad was an All-American wrestler at the University of Maryland, and I've been desperately looking for footage and photos from his college career, but haven't really been able to watch much. 87 was when he finished on the podium. But it's really special to be able to share this sport with him, and my whole family's really gotten into it since I've started covering it.
So what we're going to do now is I'm going to pull up that bracket and let's take a look. You said
Yes, we've talked about
1987.
this because
I'm
Wrestling Changed
curious.
My Life just did a whole episode about it. It's a crazy year.
Let's see. Kurt Scovel, University of Maryland, wrestled at 167 pounds, opened up with a win over Eric Oz. Oh, knocks off the 6th seed right off the bat from Cal
That's
Poly.
right. Let's
So with
go.
apologies to my buddy John Cerritos, then drops a match to Mike Farrell. So comes through the consolation. So Farrell makes, he's in the quarters. So let's see, where are we at? Coming through the backside. Where do we go? There you go. Okay. Beats Burke from Dell State. Beats Hughes from Montana. Of course, wow. Monaco from Montclair State. He's got 3 wins over programs that no longer exist, which is
Oh,
kind of gets the All American win over Monaco from Montclair State. So there, boom, hits the podium. All right, yeah. So in that weight class, we had Royce Alger, Kevin Jackson, Greg Alinsky, Joe Urso. I'm just looking at some of the names as we're going through here. Yeah, so people will remember Royce Alger in that weight class for sure in KJ. Jody Karam is in there from Lock Haven. He's a Mike Amin from Michigan. Of course, the Amin family, still very relevant and prevalent in the sport of wrestling. So Marty Morgan, when he was at North Dakota State before he transferred to Minnesota. These are things I love looking through the old brackets and just, I don't think I've ever looked at this weight class specifically to look at it and be like, oh, wow. So, yeah. So again, being able to share that with your dad, is there any perks that he gets out of this besides, hey, I mean, because he's probably paying a little bit of attention to it, right?
well, I'll tell you a story, and I've written about this, but I grew up with that picture in his office in our childhood house of them all on the podium. And so it was just kind of always in my mind that that was a special thing. But we were at the NCAA tournament in 2017 in St. Louis. We've gone together for the last couple of years. And I don't know if you remember this, Jason, but I think it was the second to last session, you gave the call and you said, hey, if anybody has ever competed in this tournament, stand up. And, he stood up. But then you said, if you've ever All-American at this tournament, stand up. And neither of us knew that you were going to say that or that we were going to have that moment. But it was just really special. He hadn't been back since he competed 30 years ago. So to have that moment, to be there together, that was just a really cool, that's something I'll always remember.
Yeah, and I got to give credit to that one to Sandy Stevens because she's the one who actually started that tradition of if you've attended Brian Hazard, I believe. I think Hazard might have thrown the All American line in there, but we've thrown that in there now with the Big Tens being at Maryland this year. Is that going to be another family reunion for
Yes.
you guys?
So that's a great question. We're still working on logistics. He'll be there. And I did my PhD at the University of Maryland, so I got to go to a lot of home duels there and stay connected to the AU team as well. So yeah, that's been really cool. We actually have a gigantic, probably a 6, 7 foot tall wooden Maryland wrestling turtle statue in our house, because when Clemson came in, he did a raffle for it and we bought it. So this gigantic turtle in a singlet sits in our house in North Carolina. So there's definitely a lot of Maryland memorabilia around the house.
Well, I might have to talk to your dad about how to talk my wife into getting something that large. I mean, I've got, my speakeasy right here, my studio. I have plenty of stuff, but I don't know if I can get a giant
Oh, it's
insert anything
awesome.
with a singlet on it. Maybe I don't even know. I mean, I might have some luck with a skating husky with the hockey connection now, but the girls might like that. But yeah, I don't know
For a
if I can
while,
get
I
it
had
now.
it in my apartment and it faced the window. And so it was like a good deterrent to any burglar who thought they were going to come into my apartment.
We used to have my roommate, my 25 college roommates I had. He worked for a beer distributor for like a summer job. You get internships at Papers. He's works for a beer distributor. So we had this Cindy Crawford like Coors Light cutout of her in like an evening dress, and we had it in our front window and the lamp in front of it. And of course, I was in an outside a PA system, so we'd turn off the lights in the apartment, turn on the lamp, and that would be lit up in the front window, and I'd have the PA system as people walk by, be like, hey, how you doing? Just kind of freaking people out. So I had the complete different giant cutout in the apartment for a completely different reason. But I believe that's the first time I've told that story. It has nothing to do with wrestling, but that's where we're going with this. To get back on track
Yeah,
with
sorry.
your career, you were recently selected as a finalist by the National Wrestling Media Association for Journalist of the Year. And when you jumped into this wrestling journey, obviously the awards are not something you chase in this, but to be recognized is nice. To be a finalist is another, and those announcements will come out later. We're still finishing up the voting on that, but the opportunities that the wrestling community has is what's been the response, the reception for you over the last couple of years in this.
I was a finalist last year, and I just never thought that that's something that would be possible. It was a hard start. It's a very tight knit community, as you know better than anyone, and it's a very passionate fan base. And so when you start, if you make mistakes, people let you know. And I appreciate the fans for reading, but it was definitely a learning curve for me to get into it, to be covering it to the depth that I wanted to cover it. I could definitely give a more generic overview of some of these matches, but I wanted to contribute to the wrestling media community. And so it was a tough process to start. But now that I'm in year 5, 6, I really do feel like I'm part of it. And the comments that I got after the announcement last week were just so kind and supportive. And it blew me away because it's been such a tough road. So to have that kind of reception is really incredible.
One thing I noticed, and this is, I go back to my entry into the sport, 25 years ago, is when we're writing about wrestling or we're talking about wrestling, the people reading us know more than we do to begin with. So, how hard is it for you to try to get something through to the reader that they don't know, or an angle that might say, "Oh, well, I didn't know that," because people reading about wrestling are rarely going to be your drive-by audience. They're people who are already interested in wrestling.
Yeah, I think when I'm doing my best work, it's when I've been able to report out a story, when I've been able to talk to coaches, talk to athletes. Those are the stories I enjoy doing the most. That's difficult in my role because I'm covering the sport nationally and working at Tennessee. So to be able to find the time to do those interviews is difficult. But my favorite stories are when I've had the chance to do. I've done some state of the weight features where I interview 6 or 8 athletes in the top 10 of the weight. And that's really fun. Being able to talk to the athletes and understand. I was never a wrestler, but I understand the grind of college Division I college sports from being a swimmer, and so I feel like I can try to explain that to my audience in a way that is interesting. And I really geek out on the writing side of it, and so trying to tell a story in the most compelling, interesting way is definitely something I take a lot of pride in.
Who are your, I guess, who do you look to for, I don't want to say inspiration, but maybe, um, maybe the word is inspiration. Who do you look for to maybe follow, or some type of path? Be like, okay, I see what they've done here with this sport, or I've seen what they've done in swimming or other sport. What other writers kind of give you a guide on, or a baseline on how you cover things?
Yeah, I try to read as much as I can from writers all over the country. I really love reading the college coverage, like the O'Cauley at Oklahoma State, Penn State's paper, because those are people who are on the ground every single day. They're talking to these athletes in class, in the press conferences, during media days, and so they have direct access. So I really love. Plus, I am just a big supporter of college media, so love reading the college stuff. The beat reporters there in the big states. I was reading Cody Goodwin for a while. I think he's phenomenal. Eli's doing a great job there at the Des Moines Register. I have subscriptions to random newspapers around the country that are not based in states that I'm at, so that I can keep up with these writers. It's a great space though, because so many people have taken their version of wrestling media in all kinds of different directions and that let their personalities come out. And I love watching stalemates. Like I love watching all these different things and trying to figure out where my voice fits in.
And is that's a hard part, because I know I struggle with that too, because I'm looking back when starting the podcasting thing, and there was nobody else doing this, and then now. I mean, when Sam and Jude showed up with the home ad advantage, I'm sitting there thinking, "What? Great! I'm battling with 14-year-olds on trying to get interviews here. Come on!" So you pivot, but in finding that space, that kind of leads to the question of how has your coverage evolved since starting out as just a social media side of things to doing those more in-depth features.
Yeah, I learned a lot. The one year I covered it for social was a new experience. I'm a writer at heart. This year I've been doing a little bit more video. That's a big challenge for me. I am not a front of the camera person. But I've evolved in just how I'm thinking about digital storytelling. Like, is this a story that's best suited for a video? Is this a story that's best suited for a long form feature? Should I only write 500 words about this story, which is my biggest challenge? I am an overwriter and love to write long stories. Um, and so that's been something that I've learned a lot over the last 6 years. But the video's been new. Definitely my preference is like, give me a good hearty feature. That's what I love.
One thing I struggle with is tiering, or not tiering, or is the hierarchy of what people are looking for. So much of journalism is based on metrics and analytics. Like, okay, I know right away if I put a story out or podcast or anything out about Iowa or Penn State, those are going to get sucked up. Those are going to get traffic. They're, if there's a poll, they're going to win the poll because of the volume of fans they have on the internet. How do you structure which stories get featured? I mean, what do you want to focus more on? I mean, how do you balance mid majors to the P5 schools, or the Bellarmines of the world and the Northern Colorados versus the Penn States and Iowas?
It's a great question. And we're pretty metrics driven at NCAA.com. So we're aware of what's going on, what the fans are reading. As someone who went to a mid major, I have such a soft spot for those schools. I love it when we can feature those teams. The best way we found to feature them and still cover the big news, and on the editorial side for wrestling, it's just me. So trying to make sure I hit, Michigan, Iowa, Penn State, Michigan, those kinds of big duels, and live blog them, provide the coverage they need while still giving these small schools who are having big moments their due. We've really worked well with our social team to do that. So if we see a big pin, like American just got a big pin last weekend, sent it over to social, they post it, they can give them a nice spotlight, and I can do an article about Michigan, Iowa. Or a couple years ago, actually last year or 2 years ago, American had one of the top pinners in the country. And so it was a great opportunity to do a story on him. So looking for ways to get those smaller schools into our editorial coverage is a big mission of mine, but we've definitely leaned on the social team to help spotlight them.
What have you noticed that teams are doing? Of course, Campbell and Wyoming's duel with UFC Fight Pass was a big topic of discussion. Having duels in strange places, the theater has become a thing at Virginia Tech, Missouri, Buffalo. Places have done it like that. But what are some things from a coverage angle that maybe your peers, not necessarily from the wrestling, be like, whoa, I saw this thing about wrestling. Are you going to do something on that?
Oh, I love it. I just did a piece with UFC Fight Pass about how they hosted these duels on the military hangar and in the barn. It's so cool. And as someone who is in a sport that is, I say resistant to change, but slower to change, I think swimming could take a huge lesson from what wrestling is doing and leaning into the fun and the excitement. I'm a North Carolina native, so what Campbell's been doing, what Pat Popolizio's done at NC State has been really great. I love seeing these coaches get innovative and get creative and not worry about breaking norms. One of the things that the UFC Fight Pass guys told me about hosting the duel in the barn is that they worried they would upset traditionalists because it wasn't on a mat in a gym. And I think wrestling is going in a great direction with these unique duels, and I hope it continues. And anything NCAA can do to encourage that kind of fun, I think it's something that I'm taking very seriously.
I realize you don't speak for the NCAA, even though you get a check that that has either the blue disc
Well,
or
I
Turner,
don't. So I
whichever.
should clarify that
Yeah.
because it's a thing here now that Tennessee's going through its thing with the NCAA. My check comes from Warner Brothers Sports, which owns the NCAA.com website. And I'm glad that we have the opportunity to talk about this because people send me stuff all the time, like what's going on with NCAA, and I don't know. Their office is in Indianapolis, and our office is based in Atlanta. So it's two different companies, but we work together obviously very closely.
Right. So, like, for example, like when I did the broadcast several years ago, I was working through Turner to do the streaming, not the big blue discs. Now,
Yes.
now we're in the
Yes.
PA. Yes, my check comes from the big blue disc. Now, also just because, well, that's also a little side note. There is, people also pitch to me about wagering and gambling. And I was like, I can't touch that stuff. I
Right.
like the gig
Me
I
too.
have.
Yes. Yes.
You ever get approached about, hey, can you do a story on lines and betting lines and stuff like that?
I get people asking me for all kinds of different things. I always have to answer for the coaches' rankings, which I don't do or put together. Um,
I
but
have to answer for the coaches. Well, the individual rankings, yeah. Oh, yeah, or the coaches poll, both of them, yeah.
and I don't have anything. I don't mind. I get it. Like I see where this is a confusing thing for people with the NCAA.com versus our governing body. And so I don't mind, but it's kind of funny.
I get it. I get it. Now, what is speaking on coming from the swimming world? I stopped into a swim meet. I was announcing at St. Cloud last week, and I had a wrestling duel against, I want to say it was Northern State, and I'm parking lot. I said, man, this parking lot's full. What's going on? I walk in and I hear this cheer. I walk through and it's like, wow, I haven't been to a college swim meet since I was in college. So I popped my head in and I'm like, man, I forgot what this felt like. Now,
It's the
swimming doesn't
best.
have the mobility that wrestling does. You can't roll up a swimming pool and drop it somewhere in the middle of, Times Square and do an event. But swimming also has what I've understood and seen over the years, a little bit of the same kind of identity problem with, is it a team sport? Is it an individual sport? And then you add the diving functionality to it because some schools don't even have diving and they're competing at the swimming and diving national championships and such. So being from that world, what are some things that you've noticed that wrestling has improved on or some things that wrestling can improve on and swimming could maybe do to make their sports maybe more spectator friendly or maybe even more, I don't know where you stand on the dual versus team championship thing. That's not the angle here, but like just curious as a competitor, what swimming can do where you see the similarities wrestling struggling with.
Yes, I am so glad to talk about this because I've been thinking about it a lot over the last year. And with the folk style freestyle debate, we have the same thing in swimming. We have short course for college and we have long course for the Olympics. And I
Okay,
will
stop.
give,
Explain
yeah.
the difference there so we can follow you here.
Okay, it's very similar to the folk style freestyle issue in college wrestling in that short course yards is 25 yards, so it's just a shorter pool. If you went to a rec pool, it would be 25 yards. The Olympics is 50 meters, and so you're doing less laps, but you're covering the same distance.
So
And
when you hear someone say Olympic-sized swimming pool, you're looking at 50 meters.
50 meters, yeah, and they might run it short course, like you can change how the lanes work, but an Olympic sized swimming pool is 50 meters across. And so as a miler, that was my event. In the college, that's 66 laps. In an Olympic sized
Wait,
50
you
meter
willingly
pool,
swam 66 laps?
Yes, that was my event.
No. No. Anyway, before I get okay, go back. Okay, now we've got the difference. Okay, short form, long form.
Yes.
Back. Okay, back to the
Yes,
folk
yes,
style
yes.
freestyle. That's where you're going
Yeah.
with that.
Like, granted, I never made it to NCAA's in college swimming, so I should just preface that. But college swimming as a mid-major, so at my conference meet, it's so exciting. Like that conference meet is a big deal. I like short course yards because that's what I swam in college. I never swam in the Olympics, but I think there's a lot of ways to make that college scene exciting. And wrestling's done a really good job with that with the national tournament and folk style. Swimming is doing a decent job with that short course yards college championship. But it's also back to your team individual. Like it's an individual championship with a team winner, just like wrestling. And I think track is the same way. Gymnastics is a little different. They've gone to the team format. And my mom was a gymnast at Maryland, and we've talked a lot about whether that's good or bad for the sport. And it seems to be working really well for college gymnastics. Swimming, like wrestling, very traditional, done things the way they've always been done. I don't know if it's changing. I think there's some push to maybe make it a little bit more team, a little bit more camaraderie, spirit, that kind of thing. Um, so we'll see what happens. But it's
I
got
just
the
remember
exact
going.
same identity crisis.
I remember going to it was ODU and James Madison back when I was in school. And it was like the walkout music, just like the amped up. No, the JMU wasn't going to come out when it was their time because, no, I remember because we used to hang out with the swimmers and the divers all the time. Like, no, yeah, they were trying to stall so they didn't have to walk out during or be in the gym or be in the pool area on the deck when we walked out and did our intro kind of thing. And it's like weird gamesmanship in swimming. This is not something because it's something in wrestling we did is we had the other team on the mat and then, okay, mat light out, boom, here comes the crazy amped up music to get that little intimidation factor in that the little head games there. But and with swimming being, there's duels and tries,
There,
and then
yeah,
there's your
yeah.
team events, you're chasing times and such. So so let's do things and compare contrast. Like wrestling, we've got one event, one weight. Swimming, you're scoring
Mhm.
points. Multiple athletes can score points in a duel type of thing. So it's a little different in that regard too. With if you're doing a true dual meet type of championship.
Yeah, but there's some strategy in like, okay, there's a couple relays. Are you going to, your best swimmer at the championships can only swim a certain amount of relays. So which relays are you going to put them on? How does that line up with the timing is a big issue. So like I swam the 200 free first event of the college dual schedule, and the 500 is later in the dual. The 1,000 is usually first. And so, oh, if I'm doing the 1,000 to 2.5, that's a lot depending on where they're all placed. So there's a lot of strategy in it, but I think more walkout songs, more strategy. Let's get more gamesmanship going on. Like let's really rile people up. Howard has done a really great job. I don't know if you've been following Howard swimming, but they're selling out their pool, which is awesome because college swimming don't usually sell out. But I would also say that some teams do a better job of scheduling rivals. Like AU is trying to create some rivalries with your alma mater. Uh, they did a duel and they did a duel with VMI. Like some of these teams that we can really compete against. Patriot League is a tough conference, and a lot of these schools have more scholarship money than American. So it's like we go out and we swim Navy. That's a tough day for us. But you feel a little better when you're losing to the people that are representing the country. But Navy's got a really tough team, so they sweep us. It's like not as fun. But you wrestle like or swim against Loyola or Georgetown, like teams where we can create a rivalry. That's awesome. And I think same thing in wrestling. Like I think AU's done a really good job trying to create some of these local in conference rivalries.
Yeah, I'm a proponent of now. Okay, let's talk about this. Your opinions on having covered this now long enough. The Ivies we're talking about their break off and
Yeah,
such.
yeah.
I know that again. You're not you're covering this, but when you first heard the Ivy was breaking off, what was your first thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't really know what to make of that because there seemed to be a lot of support for it when it was announced. And I think the Ivy Leagues have done a tremendous job over the last 6 years that I've been covering it, really growing the talent in that conference. I mean, Cornell getting a team trophy, that's amazing. And, we as American, we like to always associate ourselves with the Ivies. So I think, I don't know, as they get stronger, it could be like an ACCs where every team is really good. There's 6 teams and they're competing and, several of them could be competing for a team trophy. Um, I think it's a loss for the EIWA to lose some of these programs, but we'll see how it plays. I don't have strong feelings because I trust the leadership of those teams. I think the Ivy Leagues have an incredible set of coaches right now, and they're going to do a great job regardless of what the format is.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that wrestling and swimming both have to basically we're along for the ride when it comes to conference realignment because those decisions aren't made with our respective favorite sports involved. So, and I'm learning that a lot too with college hockey, where the only P5s are the 6 teams in the Big Ten or the 6 teams in the Big Ten and Boston College, basically. So it's like there's not that many P5s that have D1 hockey, whereas all those moves around. They've got single sport conferences. Swimming has single sport conferences. There's a moratorium on that. So when every time there's a realignment move, I'm looking like what's its impact on wrestling, and how has that kind of altered how you're looking at things from a lens like, okay, well, now this Big 12 next year, for example, is going to be a little bit nuts. Stanford's going to be in the ACC, so setting up your coverage calendar is also going to be impacted.
Oh, the Stanford to the ACC might be the most bizarre move. Now, I'm really looking forward to Ayers versus Cole. I think that's going to be so interesting. But as someone who grew up in the Research Triangle in North Carolina, it's bizarre. It's bizarre that Maryland's not in the ACC, and then it's bizarre that Stanford's coming to the ACC. Just crazy. And as a student athlete, I can't imagine the travel. Now, wrestlers already travel a bunch, which I get, and they seem to manage it well. But as a swimmer, we never really went more than the furthest we went was West Point at American, 7 hours in the bus, and we only went once every 2 years. Like we were tight geographically, and thank goodness because I wanted to go to class and do well in school and be involved in my campus community, and that allowed me to do all of those things. So I know there are student athletes who have been traveling like this for years, and it's not a new thing for a lot of them. It would be a really hard thing for me, I think, as a student athlete to have that kind of travel, but we're going to get some great duels out of it for sure.
Circling back to what we've got coming up this year and the coverage, what have been your favorite stories to cover this year? Your favorite storylines to follow throughout the season?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, 125 is just a blast. So fun. Uh,
Yeah, glad I don't do rankings anymore.
what I love about 125, and it's what I really love about covering the sport of wrestling, is that anything can happen. And this is not the case in swimming. Like if you are losing by, like you're getting lapped in the mile, you're not going to win. But if you're getting beat in wrestling, you're down 14-0. You can still win with a pin. And that makes the sport so exciting. It makes 125 so exciting. So that's been my favorite story to cover. We get all these new faces and all these guys who pull off an upset and get a big moment in the spotlight. That's so cool for them. I love that. It's also been really interesting to follow the transfers. I think it's great that guys have the opportunity to find a home that fits for them. And I mean, athletes of all sports, if you've already gotten your degree and you've completed your experience at the school and you want to go get a second degree at another school that better suits your academic goals, that's awesome. I think that's great. And if you can find a coach that helps you make those jumps late in your career, also great. So I know there's issues with the transfer portal, but it's been really cool to see how some guys have found a new home and really jumped levels.
When we get to NCAA's Kansas City this year, hasn't been there since 2003. You've been covering the last several years. What are you most excited to go to when you go to a new venue for the first time for the championships?
Well, recently, this is not championship or venue related, but recently, all of the women in wrestling have gotten together and hosted a social at the national championships. So that's been really cool and special. That's definitely something that stands out to me or my experience covering it. I like to go to new cities. It's been neat. I love seeing all the people that I interact with on wrestling media, Twitter, online, in person. And I have to say, everybody has just been so kind and welcoming, all the wrestling media people. So I've loved that. But my favorite NCAA championship, and this is a hot take, controversial opinion, was the Madison Square Garden one. It was my first one in 2016. AU, David Terrell went on that run. To be able to go to New York, I just thought that was a really cool, neat time for me.
I don't know if it's that hot of a take on this particular show because that was the first D1s I got to announce. I mean, I've been to every one since 2002, but that's like, oh, my first one I get to be on the mic for is in the Garden, and I haven't announced in the Garden before knowing it was cool, but I'm like, okay, we got a sold out Garden. And then of course we did things a little differently that year, and that kind of upset the traditionalists, like doing that interview with David Terrell after his fourth place finish. He didn't even win that match, and he got a standing ovation, which I thought was one of the most powerful things. Like Damian Santucci, who is the producer for Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve, like he works in time, he does the college sports events at the Garden, goes, I've never heard an ovation or seen a moment like that. And he works the Garden and so we've got somebody that's like, wow, that was nuts. And that was wrestling that put it in his brain. So yeah, MSG to me was also, I'd love to see it go back there. Although I live out here in the Midwest, And being originally from the East Coast, I understand the camper culture, so to speak. You want to get in the car, drive your 8 hours, because that's nothing. Park, and you're good for the weekend. We can't do that in New York City, or it's going to cost you a pretty penny, or you may not have a car an hour later.
Yeah, well, we took the train up from DC, so it was really easy. And I brought one of
Another
my
thing,
college
mass
newspaper
transit kind of
friends.
scares folks from the Midwest,
Yeah.
too. Don't ask them to get on a train in Philly or New York. But all right, Kansas City, new venue this year. We've got a weird calendar this year where it's the fourth weekend versus the St. Patty's Day weekend. So no green beer. Sorry, folks, this year. But when we look at team race right now, Penn State far and away the favorite. But any other team situations or individual profiles or wrestlers you're looking for outside of 125 that's like that you're kind of honing in on to follow through the rest of the season?
Ooh, great question. Well, Oklahoma State, what a jump for them. That's been really interesting to watch. A lot of talented freshmen they've got on the Cowboy squad this year. And to see them go from 17th to now second is just amazing. I'm interested to see what NC State can do. They've got a deep team. They're a relatively local team for me as a Raleigh native, so interested to see what they can put together. A lot of these teams have so much depth, and the question will just be how many guys can they get through. So that Friday night session is going to be so exciting.
It's always fun. Blood round and semis are also pretty crazy. So, looking at some of the things that you've experienced since 2016, I've got to think the Matt Ramos Spencer Lee situation last year was
Oh
probably
my
near the
gosh.
top of that list.
Yeah, well, the 16 run that Terrell went on is definitely the one that stands out because it was my first one, and I didn't know how anything worked, and just watching AU have that moment was really cool. The Spencer Lee Matt Ramos thing, it's hard to even describe what the vibe was like in that arena. You were there, it was just eerie. It was, and then Fix loss, like kind of a weird night.
What are some things that you might notice from a championships from a coverage standpoint that you're looking at? Okay, let's go with like how you're going to cover this thing. It's not just, there's 330 stories to cover. And then, 60 to 70 different teams. I don't, we'll get usually 71. We'll get there. Not all 80 qualify, 80-ish. But, when you're going in, you're like, okay, you've got storylines. And then when one develops and drops in your face that maybe like a run for somebody coming back from third after a first round loss or something like that, how do you look for those things? What are some things that get on your radar? How do you find that stuff? Who reaches out to you for those kinds of stories?
What a great chance for me to plug your ultimate guide. Um, that was the perfect
WrestlingPreviewGuide.com.
setup. Yes, well, that is a great resource. It's a marathon, that tournament, because I'm there as our only writer. We've got a great social team, but I go in. I know it's going to be 3 days of writing from 10 a.m. to midnight, all 3 days. It's crazy. Some of the stories that I think have stood out to me from the past years, when Little Rock had their first qualifier, that was one that really broke through. 125 last year was kind of interesting with Ventresca coming from the 25 seed. I love a good 20 below seed making a run because that was Terrell. He was unseeded at the time. So those are always things I'm watching for. I love it when guys get honest in their interviews afterwards. That always creates opportunities for follow-up stories. Sometimes you get athletes who give coach speak or cliches after they compete, but guys that are willing to open up. One that stands out to me is Palacio's interview from 2017.
Never afraid
Those
to
are
open up that guy.
no, it was my dad and I were watching that from the stands because AU was not competing in that session, and just watching that interview, you knew he was saying something wild. And so I love that. I mean, that creates a storyline. Then you want to know, okay, what's the culture going on at Cornell? What kinds of things are being said in the locker room to get them fired up? I just love it when we can get gems like that.
Well, it also kind of leads into some current events. I'm actually one of my New Year's resolutions is to read more books, and I'm starting small. I want one book a month, so I'm going to try to read 12 this year. I finished one that was a historical World War II escape thing from Colditz last month. Right now, I'm starting on one called Trash Talk, and it's a historical breakdown by Rafi Cohen on Trash Talk, and it makes me think it's like, you're talking about, when Palacio opens up and he's kind of a trash talker, it's sound bites and stuff. So from a journalist now, and from somebody that's got looking at clips and analytics, like when you see somebody that's got something that's organically legitimate versus it seems like it's contrived for their brand, but gets a big response, where is your balance, and where are you saying, all right, we're gonna follow up on that? obviously I'm going to throw his name out there just for an example, but we're not going to spend any time on the Ferrari situation. We're going to talk about this
Yes.
comment over here.
Yeah, well, and I think it's particularly cool when it comes from an athlete that isn't covered much. So, like, if an athlete has a breakthrough moment and they get interviewed, they get a microphone put in their face, and they haven't had it before, and they say something crazy, that's awesome. A lot of these guys, they're media trained. They go to press conferences every week, and they still have interesting things to say. Um, but yeah, I love it when somebody breaks through because we don't cover them enough from a wrestling standpoint, and then they say something really interesting. Another thing that I always like is, and this is the nerd in me, but when guys talk about their professional aspirations, like the Michigan guys and their aerospace engineering, that's really interesting. Like, what are these guys doing off the mat? That's a really hard major that's going to produce an interesting career professionally. Shane Griffith talked about going into private equity last year. I just find that always cues my interest.
Yeah, Patrick Glory right away. He's
Yeah.
already
Oh,
at
he's
it.
a great interview. I've spoken to him a number of times, and he is just an impressive human and a really great person to interview.
Another thing I was looking at too is we've talked about the Northwestern's having just a bad season. All their All-Americans have left, and the rising cost of graduate school, or to get that extra year, these athletes chasing that extra year. Like, are we going to pay this much sticker price to get into a grad school to stay where we're at? Or can we even get into the grad school? Because I didn't go to grad school. I spent 7 years as an undergrad. I did my school. I'm done. But when you're looking at it from an athlete's perspective here, you've gone through the athletic route, then you've also done the graduate school and beyond. You're going super higher education here. What do you think the mindset is there for like a DiAgostino or a Davison and a Cannon, for like leaving an elite academic institution like Northwestern to go to another solid academic institution like Michigan to follow on that last year of eligibility? I mean, what do you see there, and what do you see the story angles there?
Yeah, I mean, I have such respect for the sixth year guys. I know they get a lot of criticism online, but as somebody who went through grad school's hard. And to do grad school and be a Division I athlete, I remember my first semester, my PhD at Maryland, I thought, wow, if I was still swimming 5 hours a day while trying to do this work, my work wouldn't be as good. My swimming wouldn't be as good. Like, it's a tough balance. Somebody that comes to mind who has done this so successfully is Keyshawn Clark. American grad, went to law school at American for a year, transferred to Carolina. I mean, to do law school and be an NCAA finalist, that did not get enough attention because that is a crazy balance.
Now he's trying to make the Olympic team for Germany.
I
So
know it's awesome. He was a redshirt freshman my senior year, so we overlapped very briefly. But just a tough dude, somebody that was gonna work as hard as he could to achieve his dreams, regardless of what stood in his way.
yeah, and if you're paying attention to that international nugget I just dropped, his name internationally will be Andre, because they like to put that's why it's John Diakomahalis instead of Yanni. So just keep an eye out for Andre. It's Keyshawn. We know who that is. Moving forward, I actually don't want to move forward. I want to go back a little bit and talk about some of your experiences with higher education, as we kind of broached it with the Northwestern guys. Being an athlete, and then when your college career is over,
It's
I
the
mean,
worst.
you're going to be, you might do some coaching, but then, getting into the real life of like, oh no, I have to go be an adult now. I can't, but swimming is one of those sports that consumes your life since the time you start it to the time you can't just slack off and still expect to be good. You talked about swimming 5 hours in the pool, but how do athletes replace that type of passion? You've obviously traveled the world. You've done, some overseas, schoolwork and such like that, and then internships left and right. The resume is impressive. So how have you filled that gap with where you were as an athlete to now your chosen career?
Oh man, I've written about it a little bit, but my last race was the most emotional experience of my life. It was the mile, and it was just I was crying before I even got up on the blocks. So I had loved swimming and invested so much of myself into it, and for it to end, it ends so suddenly, and there's no more practice, and it's like this loss of identity. So I just did more school, did more swimming, tried to keep it going. Went to grad school, was on the triathlon team there at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and then did a year at NCAA. That was where my wrestling beat reporting began, was right after my master's degree. And then went back to school, my PhD at the University of Maryland, competed for the triathlon team there. So I just tried to keep that student athlete mindset going. And I mean, I'm still swimming recreationally, not as much as I'd like to, because I miss that. There's something so special. And this is why I love college sports even more than professional sports, is that 4, 5, 6 years you can't compare it to anything. It's so special to represent your academic institution in athletic competition, and it's just something that I'll cherish forever.
Being an athlete, I guess I'll throw this out there too. I mean, you've touched on the transfer portal and such, and like opportunities to get new ones. People say the transfer portal is ruining college sports. I don't think it's ruining
I
college
don't
sports, but
either.
I think multiple transfers is a little bit nuts. The 9-year eligibility, I think, is a little bit nuts, but I have no problem with grad transfers. And then if you want to transfer, as long as you're on academic coursework, but it seems like the path to getting a degree seems to have fallen by the wayside here. From a non-revenue standpoint, from an Olympic sports athlete type of thing, where do you sit on number of transfers, that type of thing? I mean, obviously we're seeing it everywhere. Multiple eligibility. The COVID years are starting to finally be gone. But your thoughts on the whole portal process?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody gave me more eligibility, I'd take it in a heartbeat. So I don't blame anybody for wanting to extend their college careers. I mean, I did it. I extended my college career in the grad school space. But yeah, I was desperate for more eligibility. 4 years was not enough for me. But and
Was it
I
because of
do
the
think
competition, or was it because of the camaraderie, or
all of it.
why
I love practice. I love swimming, and I loved
practice?
the grind of it.
Talking
Like,
about
yes,
practice?
get me in the water at 6:15 in the morning and let me do a 8,000-yard distance freestyle set. Like, that is my happy place. And the structure that enabled me to do that, where I had a coach, I had a team that was all there with me, and it was part of my routine. It's really hard to create that as an adult, not a college athlete, to do that on your own. And I took such pride in my schoolwork, and so to be able to wear my university on my cap and compete was just really cool for me. Um, in terms of the degree process and multiple transfers, again, I think if you're looking for more education and you find a school that offers a better fit, or in a lot of cases, you have an issue with the coach, or things aren't working out for you socially, or you want to get out of a bad environment, like, I think you should have the opportunity to go do that. If the second one doesn't work out, that's unfortunate, and you need to go find a third home. I think that's okay. I do think that's going to make getting a degree hard. I mean, it's hard enough to get a degree, period. And then you transfer, and there's credit situations. I don't know how they're managing it. They must be, because they're graduating. Um, but between trying to transfer your credits and then just trying to move, moving is so stressful. That's why if people want to move 3 or 4 times in their college career, more power to them. I didn't. That's just a lot to balance and manage, and to be re-embedded with a team. It's hard to you know find camaraderie and find friends on your team and build that relationship, and to start over every other year. I just think it's tough. But I am all about people finding the best situation for them.
Been talking with Shannon Scovel, the beat writer for NCAA.com. When it comes to the sport of wrestling, going to be covering it again throughout the course of the year, and doing some of that professional teaching type of thing down in the University of Tennessee, which one of the co-hosts here on the network with the Matstad Show, Glenn Gormley, is a proud Vol. Feature I'm working on right now with Gray Simons. I say he's my college coach, even though everybody knows I didn't wrestle in college, but he was the coach at Tennessee when they dropped the program. And of course, we talk about Sports Illustrated. So my stepbrother's uncle, Frank Emanuel, played football at Tennessee, was on the cover of SI. So we all come back to Rocky Top somehow. And the first giant women's basketball experience I had was UT ODU, when it was 1-2 at a sold out with 24,000 seats, Thompson Bowling Arena, back in 1998. So Tennessee in its sports journey has been dotting my background as well. So it's cool to, even though they don't have wrestling right now. I don't know. I don't know if I can't say I have a soft spot for any school that's ever dropped wrestling, but hey, it's just got a sports history there that has permeated a lot of different people. So that's cool that you're getting to teach the next generation there. And, ultimate career goals, where do you go from here?
Yeah, well, really quickly, I'll just say that if Tennessee had wrestling, I wouldn't be able to continue to write for NCAA, most likely, because don't feel comfortable writing about my students. So it's worked out that this has been a perfect place for me academically, professionally, and allowed me to continue my wrestling freelance job. So it's been good. But I think more sports should be added, but in general, across all schools across the country. But it's worked out, at least for me this first year, to not have to balance that ethical challenge. Professional goals, I love Knoxville. I'm just saying that. I've been here 8 months. I see it as home. I'd love to build a career here. I really enjoy my work as a professor, so I teach and do research. A lot of my research focuses on the representation and self-representation of women athletes, and I'm very passionate about that. So continuing to work on that, and building, inspiring students, and continuing to educate I'm very happy in this role.
Yeah, I'm curious on the research. So what type of we talk about academic research, I do a bunch of research, but it's mostly looking at old brackets, numbering, and then developing data, what I can get out of that for that preview guide that we talked about. But what does academic research look like in your field with this subject?
Oh, what a fun question. So my dissertation was looking at name, image, and likeness for women athletes. And so I ultimately gathered through data collection about 3,000 TikToks, Instagram, Twitter posts from women athletes, and I would categorize them and code them through process of content analysis, not to get too into the weeds, and then connected back to some theory. So I used some gender theory, some feminist theory. I used theories around presentation, um, and a couple different things, and try to make a theoretically argument about what women athletes are doing and how this fits into the literature around women athlete branding. I've also done some research on media coverage of prominent women athletes. So I just published a piece on media coverage of Sarah Fuller and her historic Vanderbilt kick, looking for ways in which that coverage reinforces and challenges some traditional norms that women athletes have experienced in the press. So it's all media centric, and a lot of it is just looking at press coverage that's come out and tying it back to some media theories.
Yeah, Sarah Fuller played up here with the Minnesota Aurora for a season.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she was in the headlines up here, and of course that topic that you're talking about. I mean, we got Caitlin Clark coming through with Iowa basketball right now. I mean, talk about timely.
Yeah. And then that was definitely credit to my advisor for kind of realizing that I could be writing into this moment and contributing to the national conversation. And I'm working to get some of that published. So hopefully in the next couple months, that will be out for people to read if they're interested.
I'm going to keep going down this rabbit hole for a little bit, because when we talk about women's sports and NIL, we're getting into wrestling doesn't get a ton of NIL, but now women's wrestling it's a championship sport on the NAIA level. It's an emerging sport at the NCAA level. Where do you see the potential for NIL with women's wrestling?
Oh, I think it's huge. I think the potential for NIL in all Olympic sports is such an untapped market. Now we're seeing some athletes really have a lot of success, but these athletes have great stories. I mentioned a lot of them are achieving great things academically, professionally, through internships. There's so many ways these athletes can get their stories out through their own channels and build up an audience, especially in sports that don't get the national media attention, because there are former athletes of these sports that want to know what's going on, like swimming, gymnastics, sports that I'm interested in just as a fan. I want to know what these athletes have to say, what they think about their duel, being able to get on Instagram Live and go, oh, here's 5 takeaways from my performance last night and sponsored by Jersey Mike's or whatever. Like there's some great opportunities there to provide fans more insight. And I think it could really grow. Schools have to invest. That was a big takeaway from my dissertation, is when schools hire videographers and photographers to capture content for these athletes, like they do for football and basketball, and share it with those athletes. People love high-paced, exciting highlight clips. And so to give athletes that and allow them to add their own personality and creativity to it, I think there's a huge opportunity for boost there.
Yeah, and again, I don't follow a ton of athletes on. One, I don't even have TikTok. Every time I jump on it, I'm like, I need to get away from this. So don't do TikTok, don't do Snapchat. But I'm on Instagram a little bit, and some of the athletes that I follow, and I find the women's athletes engagement or not engagement, but like how I'm looking at their content. I'm like, okay, we've got some when I'm following wrestling and hockey players, it's going to be it's not going to be super thrilling, but then some of the women's hockey players at St. Cloud State, they are all over the Instagram with their branded content and stuff. So we see opportunities there. The gymnast at LSU escapes me right now. Her name escapes me, but there's a good example. But again, we've got, our Olympic level athletes on the women's side. Tamira Mensah-Stock was a media darling after her Olympic championship. Of course, Adeline's been very good with the media. Helen's got a documentary and stuff. That Tatiana Padilla, or Tatiana Suarez, as we know her in the UFC, has got a documentary that's out on her on HBO. So we're seeing combat sports athletes, women's wrestlers become more names within our own sport, and that's something that even the traditionalists have had a battle with women's wrestling. But now we're over 40-something, I think we got under 5 states left to do it on the high school side of things. Given your propensity to be a glutton for punishment and wanting to swim miles and miles, if women's wrestling is a thing when you're coming up, how hard of a sell is that for your dad to get you on the mat if you're a kid looking back?
It's so funny you asked. I've been thinking about that a lot. It was not a thing when I was growing up. My brother wrestled for a couple of matches, maybe longer. I don't want to discredit his competition experience, but
still longer than I wrestled, probably.
and me. I mean, that wasn't a thing. I remember you talked about hockey. Like women's hockey in North Carolina was really slow to grow. I played 1 year of ice hockey when I was like 12 or 13. And that was it. That was all there were for opportunities for women to play hockey or wrestle. I would have loved it. I would love now just to like learn a little bit more about what it feels like to, you know, throw some moves, try to go for a pin. I think it'd be interesting. Um, I think my dad would have been into it if it was growing, if it was in the area. I think my mom would have been into it. It's a great sport, and and I'm excited to see it grow. I think it's so great for young girls and women to have the opportunity to just try it out. And maybe it's not for everyone. I don't know if it would have been for me. I like to think it would have been because I like to think that I'm tough enough to be a wrestler. But who knows? So I just think it's great that people can now give it a try.
Yeah, and if you're going to do that, I advise you do it sooner than later because as you get older, your body starts to hurt. Even though you were a highly tuned swimming athlete,
Well, swimming's low
yeah,
impact
yeah,
too. So I think about these. I watch these guys come off the mat with like bloody noses and black eyes, and like that doesn't happen in swimming. Open water gets a little aggressive, but college swimming, you're not getting black eyes or broken noses.
yeah. Nothing's trying to eat you from below in a pool. So, then again, that's just playing to the whole open water stigma about
Open water is
I've
the
seen the Meg
best.
way too many times. Anyway, on that note, we're going to end it with a bad horror movie about open water swimming and such. But Shannon Scovel, where can they find you? Right there on the screen if you're watching at Shannon Scovel. But
Yes.
where else can they check out your stuff?
NCAA.com. You can read all my work there. And yeah, I post just about everything on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well and Instagram. So it'd be great to connect with anyone who wants to chat wrestling.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw this out there too for the young women and maybe the not so young women that are out there getting into the sport of wrestling. Shannon's also a great resource for that. I know there's plenty of women that have created their little social group and they bounce ideas off each other, and they've created a nice little tight knit community there too. And again, congratulations on the finalists for Journalist of the Year. The information on that will be coming out shortly. So. For Shannon Scovel, this is Jason Bryant. This has been the Short Time Wrestling Podcast. As always, I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me, because you've always got time for short time.